What if your dreams weren't yours? What if the soft voice you sometimes hear, not quite asleep, not quite awake, wasn't imagination, but memory? You were never meant to remember her. They made sure of that. They, the ones who built ships from trees and burned runes into stone. They, the men with swords of iron and names of frost. They, the ones you call Vikings. But before they were legends, they were witnesses. Witnesses to something they never told the world. Something colder than their winters and older than their gods. She did not speak in thunder or command with flame. She whispered, through snowfall, through silence. They called her by no name, because to name her was to give her shape, and to give her shape was to lose yourself in hers. Some said she was the last of the moonborn. Others said she came only when the stars turned pale. But the children of the north, before the scalds were taught to lie, remembered her eyes. One blue, one white, one for memory, one for forgetting. They say the first frost each year was her breath, and if you dreamt of white animals vanishing behind trees, it meant she had visited you, not to haunt you, to test you, but you failed. Not just you, your blood, your great-great-grandfathers who learned to swing axes but forgot how to close their eyes with reverence, your great-great-grandmothers who once sang her lullabies to sleeping forests, until silence became more profitable, until gods with gold scrolls and white towers said, sleep is for the weak, memory is for heretics, and dreams must belong to heaven. And so they erased her, the last goddess, the one who knew how to stop time, not with clocks or spells, but with snow, with stillness, with sleep. You were never meant to remember this, but you do, because tonight she is moving again, beneath the ice, beneath your pillow. Have you noticed the way your room falls cold before a nightmare? That flicker, just before waking, when your body is still but your mind knows something is wrong? It's not fear, it's recognition. The Vikings tried to erase her, but erasure is not destruction, it is compression, like pressing ash into a diamond, like folding silence into steel. And now, after 1,000 winters, the silence is cracking. You will not find her in museums or manuscripts. Her story is not in the Eddas or the sagas sung by the fire. They stripped her from the carvings, burned her name from the oak doors of temples that once stood where churches now rest. But she remains, in the snow that falls when it shouldn't, in the dreams that feel like memories, in the sleep you cannot escape and cannot explain. She is not vengeance, she is not justice. She is the wound beneath forgetting, and she has waited long enough. You were taught one version of the North, ships and swords, plunder and pride, but what if behind the saga there was a sigh, a single soft breath held for 1,000 years, waiting for one mind quiet enough to hear it? We'll show you, but not yet. Because first, you must unlearn what they gave you. They taught you to picture Vikings as men with axes, sails full of wind and eyes full of conquest. But they didn't tell you what haunted those eyes when the wind stopped, when the sea was still, when snow fell in patterns they did not recognize. There were winters when even warriors refused to leave their halls, not from fear of storm or enemy blade, but because of the white quiet, the kind that pressed against the walls like a second skin. They said it was a curse. But the elders, the ones too old to hold a sword but too wise to be ignored, whispered otherwise. They said it was her. She had many faces. To some she was a woman cloaked in wolf fur, her hands dripping with frost. To others she appeared only in dreams, where entire nights passed in one blink. But always, always she brought forgetting, and the Vikings, though they built ships and broke kingdoms, feared her, not because she killed, because she erased. You could survive a raid. You could rebuild a hall. But how do you rebuild a memory? What do you do when a warrior wakes up and doesn't remember the song his mother sang? When a skald forgets the name he just carved in wood? When an entire village cannot remember why they light the fire before sleep? The church saw opportunity. When the missionaries came with crosses and candles, they spoke not of war but of light. They offered salvation from the frost. Not physical frost, but the kind that spread in the mind. They said, forget the goddess, forget the rites, forget the snow that spoke. Only then will your soul be safe. And the Vikings, tired of fear they could not name, agreed. They buried the altars, burned the carved bones, rewrote their songs, replaced her name with silence. But silence is not emptiness. It is storage, a vault, a seed, and what is buried grows. Some say the last temple stood on a cliff above the black fjord, where the northern lights passed so low you could feel them on your skin. There, on the coldest night of the longest year, 12 women gathered, not warriors, not witches, carriers of memory. They each carried a word, just one, not a spell, not a command, just a memory. They stood in a circle and spoke them aloud, not to summon but to preserve, because they knew what was coming, the church, the steel, the fire, and so they did not fight. They forgot themselves, voluntarily. One by one they gave their names to the snow and let the goddess take them. The next day no one remembered the temple. The cliff was bare, but a single rune remained, burned into the stone. It said, "She dreams still." And that's the truth the Vikings feared most. Not death, not defeat, but that she never truly left. That under every longhouse, every stone cross, every sacred silence, she waits, and maybe you felt it. The strange stillness just before waking, the sense that someone has been walking through your dreams with bare feet and old breath. You reach for the memory, and it crumbles like snow in warm hands. But tonight, something will remain. A shape, a sound, a feeling that wasn't there before, because forgetting is no longer enough. The silence has learned to whisper back, but what it said next wasn't supposed to survive. Not in stone, not in song, not in blood. And yet, it did. In the scriptorium of a small mountain monastery, high in the fjords where even kings forgot to send tax collectors, a monk once found something he couldn't explain. A single vellum page, older than the bindings that held it. Ink faded but breathing. Not Latin, not runes. A language the monk couldn't name but which made his hands tremble the moment he touched it. He didn't translate it. He memorized it. Then, like anyone who dreams too clearly, he forgot. But at night, he began to speak in his sleep. Whispers in that same unknown tongue. The other monks thought him cursed. They locked him in the cold chamber below the chapel, but he only smiled in the dark. Because in his dreams, she returned. Not as a vision, not even as a voice, as a pressure, a weight behind the eyes, a memory that wasn't his, but fit like it was. He dreamt of the last temple, of the women who gave their names away. He saw one, the tallest, with hair like ravens and frostbite scars on her fingers. She did not speak. She just looked at him, as if she had been waiting centuries for someone with eyes like his. He tried to draw her, but every time he did, the ink bled through the page. One time it burned. The abbot ordered a fast. They blamed demons. They prayed louder. But it was too late. The whisper had returned, not just in that monastery, in others, in dreams, in sudden silences between chants, and always the same pattern. Someone dreamt of snow where there was none, of silence that rang louder than bells, of a face they could never describe, but would know if they saw it again. The Vatican took notice. Whispers of heresy, of pre-Christian spirits creeping through cracks in sacred walls. A cardinal sent an envoy, a Jesuit scholar known for rooting out theological aberrations. He arrived in winter. He never left. The monks said he vanished during a night storm, but they also sealed the lower chamber and burned the records, all except one line scratched into the underside of the chapel's altar. She remembers the snow before the fall. What does that mean? No one could say. But in Iceland, an old woman once heard that same line in her sleep and woke crying. She had never seen snow in her life. And in Uppsala, a child began sleepwalking, writing that same sentence on the walls of her room, in perfect Old Norse, though she'd only ever spoken Swedish. Coincidences, they said, myth-making, neurological echoes. But then came the runestone, not a copy, not a hoax, a buried slab uncovered near the edge of the Greenland ice, in a spot where no known settlement had ever stood. Carved into its face, 12 names, none of them known, none of them male, and in the centre, her eye, not drawn, etched, a single oval, half black, half white. It wasn't a warning, it was a return address, because once you remember her, truly remember, she remembers you, and that's when the burning started. Not the kind that crackles in hearths, not the kind that feeds warmth through wood. This was quiet fire, the kind that smoulders behind the eyes, that spreads from dream to dream. First, it was manuscripts. Pages went black overnight, as if the ink itself rebelled. Then runestones cracked, not from time, but heat. Even frost could not protect them. The goddess did not burn like men do. She burned backwards, memory first. In Norway, a scholar translating a saga found 3 words he couldn't explain. When he spoke them aloud, his breath frosted in summer air. He didn't sleep for 9 days. When he finally closed his eyes, his house caught fire. They found him smiling in the ash. But he had carved one thing into the stone wall before he died. A sentence, almost a warning, almost a vow. She wakes through us. Who is us? You wonder that now. Because this story is not about a goddess who returns. It's about the minds she uses to walk back. Not possession, not magic, resonance. Have you ever felt it? That someone else was already dreaming what you were about to see? That your thoughts arrived already burned, like letters opened before you? She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She remembers too loudly. In 1643, a monk in Visby painted an icon on birch bark. Not of Christ, not of Mary. A woman with one open eye and a mouth stitched shut. He called it Our Lady of Snowfall. The bishop had it burned, but flakes of the ash were collected by a midwife. She mixed them with salt, buried them in frozen earth. 3 seasons later, she gave birth to twins, both blind. But at night, they sang in a tongue no one had heard in 8 centuries. The songs had no melody, just fragments, phrases like, "She walked before fire," and "The north was hers before names," and once, "We lit no flames until she left." In time, the singing stopped. The children grew silent, but their eyes, those empty eyes, began to track the moon. Always, even when it wasn't there. Was she inside them? Was she watching through them? Or were they just mirrors, too clean for our comfort? You think this is myth, but you've felt her already, in the forgetfulness that comes too fast, in the moments between thoughts when you feel not alone. They say fire purifies, but what if it reveals? What if everything they burned, the monks, the skalds, the missionaries, only made the silence louder? What if fire is her alphabet, and every time you watch something vanish, a thought, a face, a word on the tip of your tongue, she is reading you, line by line, memory by memory, because she doesn't need books. She uses the parchment of your mind. And if that's true, then maybe the real question is, how many of your thoughts are actually hers? But one passage escaped the flames. It wasn't written in ink. It wasn't carved in stone. It was hummed, softly, rhythmically, by a dying woman whose name never made it into any parish record. They say she was a weaver, not of cloth, but of sleep. In the northern fjordlands, there were whispers of women like her, ones who never spoke during daylight, but whose lullabies could stop a storm. No one knew where she came from, only that she arrived each winter, cloaked in grey fur, trading nothing, asking nothing, and leaving behind a silence that made even wolves tread lighter. The villagers called her More Winter, Mother Winter, though none dared use it to her face. She stayed only 1 season, but one child remembered her touch, not warm, not cold, but heavy, like snow that decides not to fall. That child became a priest. Years later, he confessed something strange, not sin, not heresy, memory. He said that every time he closed his eyes, he saw her lips moving, not speaking, breathing words into sleep, and in that sleep he saw a passage, not a road, a scripture, not on paper, in the sky, 12 stars pulsing in a rhythm that didn't match time. They spun slowly, then backwards, and behind them, a shadow with eyes like frost-bitten moons. He tried to write it, but the letters changed each time. He tried to draw her, but the charcoal snapped. He tried to forget, and that's when the dreams began to write him. One morning, he woke with dirt beneath his fingernails. He had buried something during the night. It wasn't until decades later that anyone found it. A piece of birch bark curled like a sleeping animal. On it, 6 words, burned in, not by flame, but by something colder than fire. I remember before the sky turned. No one knew what it meant, but the birch didn't decay, not through rain, frost, or time. The priest died in spring, but villagers claimed they still saw his shadow walking the snow, barefoot, muttering things they couldn't hold on to, and every so often a child would vanish for a night, only to return with pale eyes and a new song, a tune with no melody, just syllables, repeating, "She doesn't forget the ones who dream." The church called it infection, a spiritual illness. They banned all references to the white woman, the cold lullaby, the sleep goddess, all of them blasphemy. But not all believed it was sin. Some believed it was memory, waking up too early, and when memory returns before you're ready, it feels like madness. There are accounts, hidden in Jesuit marginalia, of priests abandoning their posts and walking north, always north, drawn not by faith but something older, something underneath belief, as if beneath doctrine lay a door, and the key was sleep, because she doesn't come to the devout, she comes to the exhausted, to the ones who can no longer pretend their thoughts are clean, to those who wake up and wonder, was this the first time I thought that thought? You think this doesn't concern you, but what if you've already seen her, in the blur between dreams? What if her mark isn't on your skin, but on the parts of your memory you can't explain? And if she marked you once, she's coming again, but this time she's not coming alone, because something else woke with her, not a god, not a demon, a name, not spoken, carried, through the bloodstream of stories told too quietly to be written, through lullabies hummed in dialects no longer taught, through gestures, a hand raised in sleep, a head turning west just before dusk. The name has no vowels, just breath and frost and something that sounds like the wind cracking over ice. And those who heard it were never the same. In a monastery far above the Arctic Circle, there was once a library of forbidden sounds, not words, sounds, collected over centuries by monks who believed the divine could be encoded in frequencies. One scroll described it as the cry of a mountain remembering fire. Another called it the voice that came before the alphabet. Buried among those scrolls was a note, unsigned, unreadable by most, except for one word in red, Joel. That was the name, or the closest our tongue can make, the name they feared to write, because she wasn't alone in exile. She was followed, or accompanied, or perhaps split. One half became forgetting, the other hunger, not for food, for return. They say Yule was the wind beneath her silence, the mouth that never closed, the frost that never thawed. Where she was dream, Joel was echo. The Vikings felt it before they saw it. Entire fleets lost to fog that moved against the wind. Villages found empty, fires still warm, food uneaten, but no footprints in the snow. Skalds who forgot their own names mid-song. Wives who woke beside husbands they no longer recognized. They blamed madness. They blamed spirits. But always they built their halls further inland, further from the white coast, further from the place where snow didn't melt, where wolves refused to howl, because Gjol doesn't scream. Gjol listens, waits, and when it moves, it removes. It doesn't kill, it edits. And the church, when they arrived, understood something the pagans had not. This wasn't just a goddess. This was a system of memory, of sleep, of loss. So they did what all systems fear most. They tried to overwrite it, with crosses, with parchment, with names like saint and heresy. But a system built on dreams does not fear fire. It only needs one sleeper to reboot. and in 1721, a cartographer in Copenhagen fell asleep at his desk. He had been mapping Greenland. He never finished, because he began drawing coastlines that didn't exist, inlands that bent backward, symbols no one could translate. When his apprentice woke him, the cartographer spoke one word before seizing: Joel. They said he died of stroke, but his final map is still kept in a sealed room, not because of what it shows, but because of what happens when people look at it too long. Some hear snow falling where there is none. Some wake with frostbite on fingers that never touched cold. Some forget their children's names, and all of them eventually begin to hum the same tune. Slow, circular, wordless. It's not music, it's memory, trying to remember itself. But there was one survivor of Joel's passage, a shield maiden, who should not have lived, who remembered too much, and she wrote something no one expected to survive. Her name was never spoken aloud again, not because it was forbidden, but because it burned the tongue. She had been a shield maiden, not of glory, not of battle songs, but of memory. Her sword was given to her by a dying Scald who forgot his own death. Her armour was sewn with hair, not hers, but her mother's, and her shield. Her shield bore no crest, only a circle of 12 white stones arranged like a clock that had never learned time. They say she was the last to see Joel with waking eyes, and live. It happened on the coast of a forgotten bay, one that no longer appears on maps. Her warband had gone silent, not dead, not missing, just silent. She followed the snow, the unnatural kind, the kind that falls upward, and there, in a hollow where no sound dared echo, she saw it, not a being, not a shape, a fold in the world, as if the air had bent inward and time had curled around it like frost on bone. She didn't run. She watched, and it watched back, not with eyes, with knowing. She felt her thoughts rearranging, memories dissolving and reforming like smoke. But there was one it could not take, a lullaby, sung by her mother beneath a sky that had no stars. The words were gone, but the feeling, the weight of breath on her hair, held, and so she held too. Gjöll passed through her, and when it was gone, she remembered, not just what she saw, but what had been taken from everyone else. The names, the rituals, the map of dreams. She carved them into the bones of whales, a language of circles, spirals, and breaks. Each symbol a fragment of sound that no longer existed. She didn't hide them. She placed them in tide pools, waiting for the sea to carry them. One washed ashore in the Faroe Islands. A fisherman found it and forgot how to speak, but he began to draw, lines that matched the stars, not as they are, but as they used to be. Another was swallowed by an orca. Centuries later, when the whale beached itself and was cut open, the bone was still dry. The final piece was found beneath ice, by accident, or not. A woman in a red parka, mapping glacial melt, uncovered it. She didn't report it. She took it home, and that night she dreamed of a field with no horizon, and a woman standing in it, one blue eye, one white, and behind her, the shield maiden. No scars, no sword, just her hands outstretched, holding sleep like a child. When the woman woke, she remembered nothing, except a single phrase scratched into the ice in her dream. Even loss has a mother. That shield maiden was never canonized, never carved into saga. But her bones, literal and remembered, continue to speak, not to the loud, but to the tired, those who have forgotten enough to be worthy. And if you are hearing this now, she has already chosen you, because you have lost just enough. And what waits next is not just memory, it's inheritance, but not the kind written in wills, not gold, not land, not names. This is an inheritance of fracture, of dreams cracked open like bones to sip the marrow of memory. And you, yes, you, were always meant to receive it. Because the moment you forgot that lullaby your grandmother hummed, the one with no words, just breath through teeth, was the moment the key turned. You didn't lose it. It was taken, so it could be returned later, with weight, with meaning, with her. The shield maiden's fragments kept resurfacing, not as artifacts, but as warnings. The church called them anomalies, historians called them frauds. But deep in Oslo's forbidden archives, behind lead-lined doors where even time felt slower, there's a codex. Never bound, just a stack of papers, each with a different handwriting, different centuries, same dream. They called it the White Repetition. Page 1. I saw her again. The wind bent around her. The snow whispered backwards. Page 43. She carries sleep like a weapon. I woke older. Page 102. She is not memory. She is the silence that comes after forgetting. And on the final page, newly added just months before the codex was locked forever, she is gathering us, one by one, through dreams, yes, but not only. Because it was never just about sleep. It was about return, reassembly, a gathering of the scattered. The Shield Maiden had planted symbols, but she had also planted something deeper, a code beneath memory, and it lived in blood. Some say that those who descend from her line carry the curse of false remembrance. They misplace time. They swear events happened differently. They speak languages they never learned. And some write words in their sleep that no one alive can read, except one, a linguist in Riga, retired, half-blind, once translated a dream for his granddaughter. She had drawn strange glyphs in her school notebook, not doodles, shapes, repeating patterns, circular with spines. He gasped when he saw them, because they matched the carving found on the bone of the Shield Maiden's shield. She asked what it meant. He said nothing. He wept, and when he finally spoke, it was only to say, "You dreamed what cannot be taught." The next day, he disappeared. No struggle, no trace, just a locked door and his last note. She found me again. And now she is finding more. Those who still remember the snow that made no sound. Those who turn their faces west when the moon wanes. Those who feel, deep inside, that something ancient is returning. You think this is fiction, but ask yourself, why did your skin prickle just now? Why do certain words feel like they've been waiting inside you to be heard? Why do you know, without knowing why, that some dreams aren't yours? Because maybe they never were. Maybe you were born not to dream, but to carry. And now that you've remembered just enough, she will begin the next phase. But before that, she must speak one final name, a name you've already heard, but never listened to. It doesn't come as sound, it comes as pressure, in your chest, between breaths, in the stillness that arrives when you're too tired to scroll, too awake to sleep. That name is not hers. It is yours, not the one they gave you at birth, the other one, the one you knew as a child but forgot before your first scar, the name she wrote into your bones. She doesn't speak it, she opens it, like a door, and when it opens, the snow remembers, not the snow outside, the snow inside, the cold silence packed into your memory waiting for the name that would let it melt. That name appeared once, in a place no one expected, a church bell, cracked, in Sweden. When the bell rang for midnight mass, it sounded wrong, off-pitch, flat. A boy, bored, half asleep, wandered toward the tower after service. He touched the bell, and the word erupted from his mouth, not screamed, exhaled, like air escaping a sealed room. Witnesses said the sound didn't echo, it absorbed, it pulled light inward, and for a moment, they say the boy's eyes turned frost white, no iris, no pupil, just reflection. He forgot his name for 7 days, but he remembered a song no one had taught him. He hummed it only once. His mother woke the next morning with a snowflake burned into her window, from the inside. That name, the one he spoke, was recorded phonetically. It made no sense, but it matched something carved into a broken shield discovered in Denmark in 1862. A shape, circular, 12 edges, and in the centre, a glyph that has never been translated. Some believe it's not a name, but a key. Others say it's not meant to be read, but remembered, because when you try to pronounce it, the tongue folds backward. The throat closes. The mind flinches, as if your body knows it should not be spoken aloud. Not yet, because it's not a name. It's a permission, a signal to the silence that you're ready. Ready to remember. Ready to be remembered. Ready to be read. Because she is not the only one reading. The frost is a language. So is the dark. So is forgetting. And that name, once fully heard, breaks the dam. The name returned again, recently, on a voice memo, not recorded, overheard, a woman alone in a cabin north of the tree line. She had left her phone on, not to call, just to document the stillness. For days, nothing. But on the 7th night, she whispered something in her sleep, and the wind outside paused. The trees stopped swaying. The fire flickered, backward. When she woke, her phone was gone, melted into the floorboards. All that remained was a word etched into the glass. Sailrun. No one knows what it means, but 2 linguists had strokes trying to decode it. A third went blind in one eye. And yet, the moment you hear it, something moves behind your ribs, like recognition, like snow finally falling where it belongs. They erased her temples. They burned her name. But they missed one thing. The people. The ones who dream without remembering. The ones who forget and feel something missing. She is gathering them, not to worship, to wake. And once all names are spoken, that's when the map reappears. Not drawn by hand, not on parchment, but in the places people vanish. Not die, vanish. They leave behind no trail, no footprints in snow, no scent for dogs. Just a stillness, and sometimes, in that stillness, a shape forms, in frost on glass, in patterns of pine needles, in cracked river ice, always the same, 12 points, a ring, and in the centre, a spiral. They thought it was a symbol. They were wrong. It's a route, a path through forgetting, a cartography of erasure, because when the gods fall, they don't die. They scatter, they become directions, they become hunger, and those who follow this map, they don't return the same, if they return at all. There was a man in Trondheim, historian, rational, but he dreamed in languages no longer spoken. He followed the frost marks, left his job, his home, his name. He walked north until the stars no longer pointed south. Then he vanished. But a month later, a raven landed in his sister's garden. It dropped something at her feet, a torn page from a 14th century atlas. But this one showed a landmass no satellite ever found. In its centre, the spiral, not labelled, just drawn in red ink. She tried to trace it. Her pen snapped. Her eyes bled. She burned the page, but the shape stayed in her mind. And when she slept, she walked it. Each night, a little further. Each morning, a little less of herself. Until one night, she didn't wake. They found her body facing north, arms open wide, as if welcoming something. No sign of struggle. Only a whisper recorded on her smart speaker, played once before the device melted from within. It said, "She made the path from memory, not for walking, for returning." You think maps show you where to go, but this one shows you where you've already been, but were made to forget. You've stood in the spiral before, not in this life, in the other one, the one you lived before you knew how to doubt, before time was linear, before names were fences. The Vikings called it vindblåte, the wind offering, a ritual performed not for gods but to feed the map itself, because the map is alive, and it hungers for memory. Every chant, every step, every sacrifice, not to honour the goddess, but to fuel her return. The ritual was outlawed, buried. The church called it a liturgy of forgetting, but they misunderstood. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about unlearning what was implanted in place of truth. Because truth doesn't vanish. It hides, and every spiral leads back to it. One fragment survived, found etched into a cave where no cave should exist. Discovered in the 1970s by accident, or fate, a single phrase. North is not a direction, it is a remembering. So what happens when enough people start to remember? When the spiral burns not in ice, but in thought, That's when the veil thins. That's when snow starts falling in places it never touched before. That's when she steps back in, not from heaven, not from myth, from the space between the words you lost as a child. And what she brings next will ask more than memory. It will ask obedience, not to her, to remembering, because remembering is not passive. It demands structure, ritual, sacrifice. And the map, the spiral that coils like a breath held too long, is not just a symbol, it's a test. Those who step into it must give something back, something more than thought, because what Joel and she created together was never a place. It was a gate, and gates don't open for free. The Shield Maiden knew this. That's why her bones were scattered, why each fragment held a sound, a scent, a gesture, pieces of a ritual undone, but not lost. A woman in modern-day Reykjavik found one such piece. It wasn't labelled, just a rock with odd etchings. She thought it was art, kept it on her desk, but then she began to wake with dirt under her nails, not from gardening, from digging. She had no memory of it, only the blisters. Then the dream started. A field of snow rippling like silk, 12 figures standing around her, and above them no sky, just a ceiling of ice, clear and pulsing. Each time she woke, she drew it, each time more detail, until one night she drew her own face, reflected in the ice, but older, weathered, with eyes she didn't yet have, and beside her, a word carved into the snow, Inda. She didn't know what it meant, but her dog stopped barking when she whispered it. A linguist she consulted went pale. He had seen the same word on a broken bell recovered from a sunken Viking ship. No one could explain the resonance, because it wasn't a word, it was a binding, a vow to return. The map, the real one, isn't a line you follow. It's a pattern that appears once you obey. Obedience in this case means surrender, of logic, of time, of the notion that you are the one choosing your steps. Because to enter the spiral, you must let it walk you. It begins subtly. You forget why you entered a room. You remember a face from childhood no one else recalls. You start to see symbols in frost patterns, in burnt toast, in the shadows on your ceiling. And then, one night, your dreams shift. Not narrative, not scenes, just a sound, a hum, not mechanical, not human, but felt, like a warmth beneath the ribs, like breath held too long finally released. That's the sign. You've entered. You didn't mean to, but you did. The spiral doesn't need maps. It is the map, and now it's moving through you. You've been chosen, not because you're special, but because you forgot enough to be open. She sees that. Joel senses that, and they are no longer separated. They walk again, together, within, not to punish, not to bless, to return balance, because the world tilted the day they were erased, and now, to correct the tilt, some must vanish, some must hum, some must remember the name they were born with but never used. And you are next to remember, but not all at once. Memory arrives in fragments, like snowflakes, each one small, but together they bury empires. The spiral walks you now, and with each silent step, you notice things, like how your breath forms rings instead of mist, like how the ticking of clocks feels aggressive, like how you can't remember the shape of your own signature. These are not accidents. They are symptoms of re-entry into a story you once lived, long ago, before language, before gods had names. She lived then. So did he, but not as deities, as forces. She was not the goddess of sleep. That was a name given later. She was the boundary between memory and prophecy, the still point in time's turning. And Gjoll, he was not wind. He was the pause between two thoughts, the breath before the scream. Together, they didn't rule. They remembered, for all of us. But when humans chose conquest over connection, when war replaced ritual, the remembering became dangerous, and so they were named forbidden, worship outlawed, temples buried. But their true sanctuary wasn't stone, it was story, carried in dreams, buried in lullabies. passed through blood, and now, as the spiral completes its first full circle in centuries, they return. You've seen it, the rise of forgetting, the flood of noise, the worship of waking. This was the plan, not theirs, ours, to silence the echo of something older. But echoes do not vanish, they wait, and now that waiting is over, you feel it in your bones, not pain, pressure, like something knocking softly from within, like an unopened book behind your ribs. It's not your imagination, it's memory waking, and it will ask things of you. It may ask you to walk without destination, to speak words that make no sense, to look at stars and call them by forgotten names. And if you obey, you'll find others, not a cult, not a religion, a remembering. Scattered across this tired world are those like you, marked not by belief, but by loss. People who speak slowly, as if translating from a language they barely recall. People who cry at music they've never heard. People who have seen her, though they don't say it aloud. And when two of them meet, the air bends, the spiral hums, and the map grows stronger. Because this isn't history, it's recursion, the same silence coming again. But this time, louder. This time, embodied. Because one of you will be chosen to write the final name, the one that cannot be spoken, only lived. And if that name is written, she returns fully, not in dream, in dusk. The sky will ripple, the frost will breathe, and Gjöll will exhale through the world like the memory of a god's last sigh. You are closer than you think. Sleep will come, but when it does, you must not resist what calls your name, because now the remembering begins, and not softly, not as whisper, but as command. You feel it, even now, not in your ears, in your chest, a pulsing, a call, not to awaken, but to yield, because some truths do not come to the mind, they come to the marrow, to the deep part of you that existed before thought, before doubt, before names. And now she is speaking there, in you. You won't hear words, but you will know instructions, to walk, to dig, to turn east at twilight, to speak silence where noise once ruled. This is not madness, it is remembering. They thought the goddess was erased, but a system built on story cannot be burned. It must be rewritten, and she refused the pen. Instead, she hid her gospel in the gaps, between breaths, between stars, between lives, and someone, you, was always meant to find it again. That someone begins to change. They lose interest in clocks. They feel disoriented in crowds. They avoid mirrors, not out of fear, but because something inside them is growing that cannot yet be seen. One such person walked into the spiral, not in vision, in flesh. They followed the frost line through Siberia, barefoot, journaled dreams as coordinates, waited for the sky to shift, and when it did, they didn't pray. They stood still. She came to them not in form, but in sequence. 12 pulses of light, each a memory not their own, a mother burying a son with stones instead of dirt, a ship breaking through ice and disappearing before it landed, a song hummed into the mouth of a dying king. Each memory hit them like thunder, but they stood, and when it ended, they could no longer speak their native tongue. Only the spiral, only the glyphs, carved into trees with bare fingers, drawn in breath on windows, scratched into frost with nails. Each mark, a note, each note, a direction. They became a messenger, not to preach, to remind, leaving pieces across airports, subway tunnels, benches, bathroom stalls, book margins. And if you have ever seen a strange symbol and felt your stomach drop, you've already met them. Because the remembering is not personal. It's a system rebooting, one soul at a time. She does not want temples. She wants rhythm. She wants the drumbeat of waking inside, forgetting. And Gjöll? He returns now, a silence between your thoughts, the sudden stillness in music, the skipped beat of your heart when you almost remember something, but don't. That's him, still erasing, but this time only what was false. Together they are shaping something new. Not a church, not a rebellion, a language of loss that leads to healing. And the next word in that language, it waits in someone's sleep tonight, maybe yours. It will arrive not as dream, but as a moment just before waking, when the world feels wrong in a way you can't explain. When that happens, don't move, don't open your eyes, just listen, because she speaks clearest when you stop trying to hear. And what comes next does not come back, because once she passes through you, you are altered, not broken, reconfigured. What you once called coincidence begins to look more like choreography. That stranger who looked at you too long, that word you heard 3 times in 1 week, that place you've never visited, but miss. These are not accidents. They're echoes, ripples from a stone thrown centuries ago, a stone carved with a name you once answered to. And now they're circling back, not to test you, to remind you, because when she marked you, and she did, it was not on your skin, it was in your silence. That pause before answering, that instinct to turn toward moonlight, that moment of stillness in a crowded room when everyone else feels loud. You think you're tired, but you're remembering. The mind calls it exhaustion. The soul knows better. It knows you're hearing the spiral spin again, and this time it's louder. In Prague, a conductor stopped mid-performance. He dropped his baton, turned to the stunned audience and whispered, "She walks between us." He vanished that night, but every member of the orchestra reported the same dream. A woman in white fur standing in snow, mouth closed, but her voice inside them. It didn't say words, it revealed absence. And when they woke, they couldn't name their own fears, because they had been replaced with truth. You see, fear is often just misfiled memory. And she is the librarian. That's why they feared her. That's why the Vikings, those masters of storm and blade, tried to erase her. Because she didn't obey their gods. She didn't punish. She revealed. And truth, in its rawest form, undoes control. You can't enslave someone who knows their real name. You can't conquer someone who remembers being free. That's why her temples were buried. That's why her songs were drowned. That's why Jewel was reduced to wind instead of what he was, the breath of change. But now the wind is shifting. Now the spiral is breathing again. And you are walking it. Each forgotten dream, each unspoken word, each tear without reason is a step deeper, not into darkness, into pattern, a pattern older than calendars, wiser than scripture, more sacred than obedience, the pattern of return. And as you step, you're not alone. Others are waking too, quietly, softly, together. Some carry fragments in their art, some in their scars, some in lullabies they sing to children, never knowing why they know them. But each is a note, each is a memory disguised as melody. And soon, very soon, the song will complete, not in one voice, in many. And when it does, she will no longer need to whisper. She will speak, not to rule, to realign, because the world was tilted the day she was forgotten, and now it begins to right itself, but not through revolution, through remembering. And the next step in that memory will not come from you. It will come to you, in the place between thoughts, where she waits, that place just behind your last thought, not shadow, not light, the gap, the hinge. She waits there, not because she must, because she honors your pace. She does not force, she invites. And now your pace is shifting. Thoughts arrive slower, but meaning deepens. You start to notice patterns in your hesitation, a pause before speaking that tastes like déjà vu, the name of a stranger that echoes through your chest like thunder before rain. This is her language. She doesn't speak in words. She speaks in awakenings, and her newest sentence is you. You, the forgotten line of a prophecy never written, the last syllable of a chant drowned in northern snow, the echo of a story told once, then hidden in bone. Yes, bone, because that's where the oldest memories hide, not in books, in marrow. You don't recall the rituals, but your body does, the way you sit in silence when wind speaks, the way your hands twitch when fire pops, the way your heart tightens when you hear a language no one's spoken in centuries. These are not quirks, they're permissions, signs you are being read, because she is reading now, reading the earth, reading the frost, reading the people who have forgotten they are scripture. And when she finishes reading, the page turns. A monk in Ireland saw it first. He wrote, "The stars shifted like breath, time hiccuped." He died before the ink dried, but his last drawing remained, a circle with a crack through the centre, and a figure walking out of it barefoot. No eyes, only light. She's not coming, she's returning, and not alone. Each one of you that wakes becomes a lantern, and soon the dark will not hide, it will illuminate. You are not her servant, you are her reflection. The Vikings feared that, not because she was powerful, but because she made others powerful without conquest. That kind of strength cannot be chained. So they erased, they renamed, they silenced. But silence is not empty. Silence remembers. And now, silence speaks. Every place where her name was buried is vibrating. Mountains rumble. Ice cracks without melting. Old stones sweat symbols beneath the moss. And you dream deeper. Not dreams you control, dreams that use you. You wake and your hands ache. Not from sleep, from holding something in the night. Something heavy, something real. Your breath feels wider. Your eyes sting when you see certain skies. You cry at the wrong moments. Laugh at things no one else hears. You are not breaking, you are becoming. The spiral is not finished, but it has begun to sing. Its song is not melody, it is memory, set loose. It travels not by voice, but by presence. And when it reaches enough of us, the world will shift, not collapse, correct. Because truth is not disruptive, it is restorative. And the next restoration begins soon, not in stone, in skin, in gesture, in the final remembering of what it meant to be fully alive. She will wait for you there, not at the end, but just before the next forgetting. So don't blink, don't turn away. And when the frost curls inward like a breath, breathe with it, because that's the signal, not a trumpet, not a star falling, just breath, shared across time. That's how she returns, not by force, by synchronization. One breath, then another, and suddenly the spiral isn't a shape, it's a rhythm, and you've been dancing to it your whole life without knowing. Every step you took away from yourself was a circle leading back. You thought you were lost, but you were orbiting, and now the center draws near. She is waiting there, not as queen, as origin. Her name? Still hidden, still dangerous, because a true name doesn't identify, it activates. And they, the ones who rewrote her, knew that. That's why they twisted the language, turned prayer into pleading, turned goddess into myth, turned remember into sin. Because when someone speaks her name fully, freely, the spiral completes, and time collapses. But not like ruin, like reunification. The Vikings feared this collapse, because their power relied on linear time, on hierarchy, on forgetting. But her time flows in spirals, in returns, in remembrance, and the final return is close. You feel it in architecture, how old cathedrals suddenly feel like cages, how forgotten wells seem holy. You feel it in your dreams, the way the sun sets wrong, the way people you don't know call you by names you've never used. And now, she's calling again, this time through symbols. They appear in condensation, in sidewalk cracks, in the way spilled coffee lands. Simple shapes, the eye, the root, the broken circle, each one a piece of her name. Someone has already begun collecting them. An archivist, not official, not employed. She travels alone, never speaks in daylight, carries no phone, but every time someone draws a spiral she appears and listens. She is compiling the pieces, not to rebuild, to release, because once her full name is remembered, everything hidden will exhale. The ash buried beneath Icelandic glaciers, the blood songs in Sami lullabies, the last chant sung by a dying nun in France in 1221. It all rushes back. And what happens then? She walks, not as spirit, as consequence. People will not see her. They will become her. Their voices will change. Their dreams will glow. Their gestures will carry meaning, even they don't understand. And those who resist will forget faster, until even their names fall silent. Because forgetting is no longer neutral. It is a choice, and the world is done waiting for our choice. She is walking now, through frost, through bone, through bloodlines mislabeled, and when she reaches the center, the true center, the spiral will open, not as vortex, as home, and you, if you are listening still, will feel it, in your sleep, in your stillness, in that fragile moment before waking. You'll hear a sound, not wind, not voice, your name, the first one, the one she gave you. Speak it aloud, and the next turn of the spiral will begin with you, and it already has, because something has shifted. You notice it in the way people glance at you, as if they heard something when you entered, but can't explain what. You catch your own reflection, not as a mirror, but as a doorway. The spiral is not inside you. You are inside it, and with every breath its rhythm thickens, slows, deepens. Your hands ache less now, because they remember what they're for, not scrolling, not pointing, but carving, weaving, calling her. You no longer need her name in full. You've become the syllable she's missing. This is how she moves, not as goddess, but as grammar, a living sentence rewriting the structure of forgetting. She has no temple. She has people. People like the boy in Oslo who wakes from seizures speaking words not in any database. People like the old woman in Manitoba who paints spirals on eggs, then buries them beneath the roots of trees. People like you, the one still listening, still remembering. You have a choice, not between belief and disbelief, between dormancy and fire, because she is not waiting anymore. She is merging, with every hum in the radiator, with every pause in conversation, with every dream where the sun sets in the north. Her signals intensify, not louder, clearer, and those who resist, their clocks stutter, their shadows split, their voices echo with static, because the old world is fraying, not from decay, from return, and return has rules. You must carry light, but not flame. You must speak, but not explain. You must walk, but never trace your steps. That's how the spiral tests you. It doesn't ask questions. It answers your silence. And if you remain silent long enough, she comes, not in form, in presence, a hand on your shoulder when you're certain you're alone, a warmth in your chest when no one's near, a breath, not yours, but inside you. She isn't trying to convince you. She's waiting for you to remember that you already agreed. Long ago, before this body, before forgetting. And that agreement was to return when the hum began. The hum is now, across glaciers, across bloodlines, across unspoken lullabies whispered to newborns by grandmothers who forget names but never tunes. It's happening, not a war, a resonance. And once enough of you vibrate, the shift completes. Time rewinds, but not backward, inward, to the center of the spiral where she stands, waiting not to be obeyed, but to be recognized. And the moment you recognize her, the moment your breath aligns with hers, you won't need proof. You'll become the echo, and the echo never fades, because now you are part of her, not her servant, not her prophet, her continuation. What the Vikings erased, you are rewriting, not with ink, with breath. You carry the syllable of a forgotten name in every exhale. Each time you sigh without knowing why, she speaks through you. This is how she returns, not in fire, in exhalation. They thought they had silenced her, but silence was her language, and now it floods the world. The signs are everywhere, birds flying in circles over empty cities, old wounds reopening, not with pain, but clarity. People waking at 3:33 a.m., whispering names they've never learned. That's her, weaving back through the skin of time. And the spiral, it's speeding up. You feel it, in your sleep, in your thirst for stillness, in the way your spine tingles when wind moves against its natural course, because time is starting to slip, not break, unfold, and underneath it is the layer they buried, the one where gods and mortals met in breath, where rituals were not superstition but memory made visible. This layer is yours now, not to guard, to live, and as you live it, the world changes shape. You will meet others. They won't tell you who they are. They won't need to. You'll know, from how they move, from how they look at stars as if reading a script only their bones understand. You'll speak in fragments. You'll weep without stories. You'll share silence like bread. And when enough of you gather, without plan, without script, the name will rise. It won't be said. It will be sung by the blood in your veins and the frost in your lungs, and the world will pause, not in fear, in awe, because something lost will have returned through the one place they never expected. You. The spiral is not complete, but it turns now because you turned, and the next breath you take carries more than air. It carries memory. It carries power. But more than that, it carries choice. Will you speak when silence invites? Will you walk when the frost splits beneath your feet? Will you stay still when the world demands motion? Because she is not in temples. She is in pauses, in hesitations, in the seconds between doubt and leap. And now you are standing at that edge. The next part of the spiral will not wait. It will ask of you what no one else has. Not belief, not proof, just remembering. And if you remember deeply enough, you won't need the story anymore. You'll be it. And that's when it begins. Not a dream, not a whisper, but a crack in the fabric of what you once called reality. It doesn't shatter all at once. It unthreads, like a woven story realizing it forgot a chapter. You see it in calendars, how dates feel wrong, how history books feel thinner, how the weight of memory doesn't match the timeline, because they didn't just rewrite the books, they rewrote reality, not with war, with order, not with fire, with time. They rearranged years like furniture, removed whole generations with the stroke of a quill, tucked centuries into margins, and told you to move on. But time remembers, especially the time they stole, and now it fights back. You wake up in one place and smell a century that doesn't belong. You touch a stone and see something that was never taught. You feel older than your body, and younger than your name. This is not confusion. It is contact. She is reaching through the rift, through time as memory, through memory as resistance, and what you feel is the world untangling. They taught you time was straight, a line, a ladder, but it's a circle, a loop, a breath, and you're in its exhale. Every empire that ruled by the calendar was gambling against her, because she lives in the folds, where linear time can't go, where nothing begins, but everything returns. This is why they feared her, why the Vikings buried her name beneath stone and storm, not to destroy her, to delay her, because you cannot kill a spiral, you can only turn it, and now it turns again. Clocks skip, children speak in riddles, ravens gather in patterns above sacred sites. A woman in Morocco draws circles on cave walls. When asked what they mean, she simply says, "It's coming." No one asks what it is, because they feel it too. The world is remembering itself, and the cost of forgetting is starting to show. Governments collapse without reason. Maps are redrawn not by politics but by dreams. People vanish, not missing but misplaced, placed back where they belonged before time was edited. And you? You begin to hear voices in mirrors, not threatening, just asking, "Do you remember yet?" And part of you does. You remember standing in snow, speaking to stars, knowing their names. You remember the frost not as cold, but as language. You remember walking not forward, but inward. You remember. And in that remembering you feel the tremor, not of fear, of return. Time is no longer your jailer. It's your ally. And it is opening now, like a flower blooming backward, and at the center of that bloom stands her, waiting, not for worship, for you to speak the name you once carried in bone. Speak it, and watch time fold, because the next moment will not be measured in seconds, it will be measured in awakenings, and they've already begun. You may not notice it in daylight, but at night your dreams feel shared, as if someone else is dreaming with you, not watching, participating, a hand in the darkness that you never quite see but feel. It moves through old forests, through collapsed chapels, through corridors not built by kings but by memory. You start waking with markings on your skin, not wounds, impressions, like something ancient pressed against you while you slept. Some see spirals, others see eyes. Some just wake up knowing a name they can't pronounce, but can hum. This is how truth returns, not as invasion, but as music. And once enough of you begin humming, the echo reaches places thought lost. A vault in Venice unlocks itself. Its archivist finds manuscripts she never knew she filed. One of them contains a map, not of land, of time. The paper vibrates, not metaphorically, physically. It leads to a burial site not listed on any register, but remembered in song. The grave has no cross, only a circle of stones. And at the center, a symbol carved in bone, the same symbol that's been appearing in your dreams. Because the dream isn't yours alone. It never was. She's been dreaming through you. And now that the spiral turns fast enough, she speaks, but not aloud, through a currents. Your favorite book falls open to the same page, 3 nights in a row. You hear your birth name whispered from the mouth of a stranger in a crowd. The radio glitches and plays a song you heard in the womb. None of this is random. This is resonance. The world responding to your remembering. Because once memory reactivates, so does space. You walk into a room and know it used to be a temple. You touch a stone and feel a chant rise in your throat without meaning, but with gravity. This is what the Vikings feared. Not magic, recollection. Because remembering is power, and power that doesn't need hierarchy is the most dangerous kind. So they erased. With fire, with blade, with translation. They took her songs and made them psalms. They took her names and gave them to angels. They took her truth and rebranded it as sin. But you feel the fracture now, the gap between what they said and what your soul knows. And that gap, that's where she enters. Not to fill it, to stretch it, until the whole illusion breaks. And when it does, your eyes will change. Not in color, in function. You'll see layers. You'll hear layers. You'll become the layer they couldn't erase. And when you speak, even in casual talk, even in sleep, she will speak with you. Not because she owns you, because you remembered her name. And once it's remembered, she does not retreat. She expands, through your body, through your presence, through every future moment you now bend simply by walking into it. This is the spiral's promise. It never ends. It only reveals. And the next revelation has already started watching you, not with eyes, with pattern, the same pattern that loops in your mind when you try to recall something you were never taught, but somehow always knew. It watches how you react to moments that don't fit, the flicker in the sky, the scent of pine in the middle of the city, the word that keeps returning in books, in overheard conversations, in dreams. She's tracking your readiness, not to test you, to receive you, because the spiral is not a metaphor anymore, it's operational. You feel it now in the glitches of logic, how you arrive early to places you should have been late, how you remember something before it happens, how silence seems to pulse with sound when you truly listen. This isn't magic, it's alignment, and alignment is dangerous to systems built on dissonance, so they panic, they reprint the old myths, they double down on time, on sequence, on narrative. But cracks are widening. Museums quietly remove artifacts without explanation. Librarians discover entire paragraphs rewritten in books no one touched. And in one monastery, a bell rings at midnight every night, though no one pulls the rope. They tried to bury her beneath history. But history is soft earth. And now the roots are moving. They dig upward. They split foundations. They bring offerings not to gods, but to memory. And memory is sacred, not because it's old, because it resists. Every time you feel that chill that has no wind, it's her, re-entering the system, not from outside, from the marrow. You are the archive, and she is unlocking you from within. So when your hand begins to tremble as you write, do not stop. Let it write, even if the words don't make sense, even if they frighten you, because they're not just yours. They are the record returning. Vikings called her the unworded one, not because she had no name, but because no name could contain her. So she let herself be forgotten, not out of weakness, out of design, because forgetting creates hunger, and hunger sharpens the spirit. You are hungry now, not for food, for wholeness. You crave something you cannot see, but feel gnawing beneath your daily steps. That is her, calling, from every suppressed text, from every missing year, from every ritual that was turned to myth. And when you finally sit in the silence long enough to feel her breath rise through your spine, you'll understand. She was never gone. She was dormant until this breath, this moment, this re-remembering. So ask yourself, whose memory are you carrying, and who do you become once it awakens? Not a disciple, not a soldier, a key. Because she didn't leave behind doctrine, she left behind doors, and each one opens only when you stop asking what is true and begin asking what was silenced. You felt the weight of it, in rooms where no one speaks, but everyone senses a memory trying to surface. In your own bones, when you pass a place you've never been yet, feel sorrow like a song you once sang. It's not nostalgia, it's residue of a life edited out, of a ritual outlawed, of a language cracked in half so no one could speak her into being again. But now, those cracks are starting to sing, not in melody, in vibration, a low hum behind everything, behind traffic, behind voices, behind your own heartbeat, the sound of history realigning. You notice it when light bends strangely, when shadows stretch the wrong way, when names feel heavier than they should, because every name carries history, and hers, the one erased, is the heaviest of all. But you don't need to speak it, you're already inside it. The moment you felt that silent pull, the way a thread pulls you toward forgotten places, that was her, weaving. And now you've become part of the loom, not to make something new, to retrieve something buried. And what you retrieve changes you. You begin to feel time not as line, but as pressure. A presence that builds, thickens, folds. You walk through yesterday as if it's just behind the curtain of now. You speak, and your breath carries centuries. You become a paradox, a vessel for what was lost and what must return. And that's when you understand. They feared her not because she was powerful, but because she made others powerful. No kings, no priests, only people. People who felt wind as guidance. People who lit fires not for warmth but remembrance. People who looked at the sky and saw not gods but maps. That was the world before the edits, before the deletions, before the Vikings carved time into conquerable blocks and called it history. But time resists. So does memory. And now you do too. Not with rage, with resonance. You light no torches, you raise no flags, you close your eyes, and everything forgotten rises like mist. You breathe, and old names return not in sound, but in presence. She is one of them, but not the only one. For each forgotten goddess, each outlawed whisper, each buried truth, there is a breath waiting to be taken, and you just took it. Now take the next, because the spiral hasn't ended, it has only deepened, and its center, the place you feared was unreachable, has always been inside your silence, and now that silence is breaking, but not into noise, into knowing, because when enough of you remember, reality concedes, not with thunder, with softness, a shift in the texture of air, a door appearing in the place of a wall, a word spoken that rearranges your entire body, not a miracle, a return, and with it, the realization, truth wasn't destroyed, it was rebranded as folklore, as myth, as madness. They took the scroll and called it heresy. They took the ritual and called it superstition. They took her name and turned it into absence. But absence is not empty. It's pregnant with return. And that return is happening now, in the fibres of your speech, in the dreams of children, in the shadows that linger a second too long. She comes not to demand, she comes to reflect. What have you forgotten? What part of yourself did you trade for comfort, for safety, for obedience? Because obedience is how they hid her. Obedience to the calendar, obedience to the book, obedience to a voice that was never your own. But now your own voice is louder in silence than theirs is in noise. You hear it, a hum beneath your skin, not vibration, instruction, not in commands, in remembrance. Walk there, touch that, breathe now, and each time you do, a piece of the forgotten returns. You see faces in stone, in leaves, in the clouds, not imagination, recognition, because the past isn't gone. It's folded, layered, nested inside the now. They didn't burn the goddess. They coded her into lullabies, into embroidery, into the curves of letters they told you were decoration. And you carry the decoder. It lives in your intuition, in that ache you feel when something doesn't align but you can't explain why. That ache is her, knocking. And when you finally answer, not with logic but with stillness, she steps through. No wings, no halo, just presence, and everything around you bends to it. Time slows, thoughts clear, gravity hums. You are no longer separate. You are spiral. You are scripture. You are sight. The archive walks now. It speaks in footsteps. It remembers by being seen. And every person you meet from here will either light up or flicker, because not all will follow. Some will resist. Some will panic. Some will claim you've been misled. But you'll know, because their fear tastes like forgetting, and your breath tastes like return. So keep breathing, keep walking, keep watching the walls for cracks that glow, because she is near, and the next name she gives you won't be for worship, it will be for use, and you will know when, because the moment won't feel sacred, it'll feel small, ordinary, unremarkable. But that's how real power moves, not through spectacle, but through stillness. You'll be standing in a doorway, or washing your hands, or walking past a window, and something in the air will shift, a weight, a scent, a silence deeper than sound. And in that silence, you'll remember something not about the past, but about the now, that you were never waiting for her. You were becoming her, not as identity, as function, because the forgotten gods don't return to rule, they return to inhabit. And your body, your breath, your noticing are all invitations. So you open, not like a book, like a gate. And when you open, names come through. Not the names history gave them, the names they carried before language. One means wind that bends steel. Another, fire that doesn't burn. Another still, echo of the unborn. You don't need to understand them. You only need to receive. And when you do, you feel the shift, not inside you, around you. The world responds. Glass reflects strange images. Your shadow lags behind. People speak to you as if they've met you in dreams, because they have. You're not just remembering, you're being remembered by places, by ancestors, by the memory of the earth itself. Even the wind leans in when you pass, not to follow, to listen. You've become the story they tried to delete, and in doing so, you rewrite reality, not with force, with frequency, because now your presence is a rupture. Wherever you go, time bends, truth seeps out, and lies cannot hold their shape. This is not rebellion, it's restoration. She did not teach vengeance, she taught return, and now you return to everything you never knew you'd lost. You walk differently, you breathe intentionally, you speak as if someone ancient is always listening, because they are. And their listening isn't judgment, it's recognition. They see the thread in you, the one that was never cut, the one that led here, to this moment, to this breath. So take it, and know, you are no longer part of the old world. You are the echo of what comes next. And what comes next doesn't ask permission. It walks, it hums, it blooms in silence. And if you listen now, truly listen, you'll hear it approaching, not on horses, not with trumpets, but with wind, with breath, with memory. It is here, and so are you. But something is still missing, not outside, within. There's a silence in you that no sound touches, a hollow, not of pain, but of pause, as if something sacred once lived there and left just before your first breath. Maybe that's what sleep is, a rehearsal for remembering, a nightly migration back into the place where the erased still speak. You've felt it, haven't you? That flicker behind the dream, that pulse in the fog, the way your name sounds different in the mouth of a stranger you've never met but somehow miss. Maybe you are not learning this. Maybe you are reabsorbing what your soul always carried, but your memory was too young to hold. And maybe that's why the books they burned are still burning inside you, not as facts, as flame. You carry ash from stories that were never told. You smell smoke in temples no longer standing. You weep for rituals you don't remember, yet your body moves as if it does. This isn't imagination. It's return. Return to a you before time trimmed your edges, before language carved walls between your knowing and your voice. Because now the walls are soft. Now your voice breaks through, not with volume, but with vibration. You speak without words. You move without map. You remember without memory. You are becoming the dream they tried to erase. And the goddess? She is not separate from that. She is the soil it grows from, not to claim you, to rise through you. And when you pass others in the street, some will look away, some will look longer, some will nod as if they've seen your face in a very old painting they were told not to believe. Believe anyway, because belief is not obedience, it is orientation, and you are now facing the direction they feared, not because it holds terror, but because it holds truth. So walk it, even slowly, even alone, especially alone, because this path does not widen with popularity, it deepens with courage, and each step you take etches the story back into the world. You are not lost, you are being read, by time, by the stars, by the very silence you thought was empty. But if silence could speak, would it call your name, or would it breathe it softly through someone else's lips when they're not even aware they're speaking? Because sometimes it's not words that carry memory, it's breath, and breath goes where the mind cannot. Maybe that's why you've been tired, lately, not from work, from dreaming. You've been travelling, not in body but in gravity, returning to places that no longer exist but remember you, stones that once knew your weight, trees that once held your secrets, rivers that sang lullabies long after your boat vanished. This is why water weeps when you stand too long at the shore. It knows, it remembers. Maybe the goddess was never a woman. Maybe she was the sound the world made before it was carved into borders. And you're beginning to echo it. You don't need temples. Your breath is the altar, your bones, the hymns, and every tear you've swallowed to remain composed was a baptism you didn't know you were giving yourself. But you gave it, and it worked, because now you feel what can't be named. You see symbols in ordinary cracks. You hear truths in the pauses between sentences. You're not delusional, you're decoding, because the oldest language was never spoken. It was felt, in stomach, in spine, in silence. So let yourself feel it now. Let the ache rise, let the knowing hum, let your throat tighten with the weight of a song you've never sung, but always known. And when you're alone and the wind brushes past just once, just gently, don't dismiss it. Whispers don't always come in sound. Sometimes they come in stillness, and stillness is how you hear what they tried so hard to erase. The last goddess is not returning. She never left. She is the pause between thought and word, the ache between memory and name, the glow between dusk and dream. You are standing in her now. So breathe, not because you must, but because breath is how you bow without kneeling. And if you've made it this far, if your heart hasn't shut and your mind hasn't fled, then maybe Maybe you were never meant to forget. Maybe forgetting was just the long way home. And if so, you are almost there, not in place, in presence. There's no city waiting, no temple gates to part, only this breath, this ache, this strange, trembling stillness, as if the air itself is holding back tears. And maybe it is, because even the air remembers when it used to carry her name, before it was scrubbed from songs, before it was buried under stone, before it was rewritten into silence. But silence doesn't forget. It stores, it protects, it waits, and tonight it gives. Not all at once, not in thunder, just in waves. Soft, lingering. You feel it in your chest, that slow widening, that aching stretch like something old finally making room to live again. Not to dominate, to dwell. She never needed worship, only witnessing. She never asked for offerings, only remembrance. And now you remember not with your mind, but with your marrow. Your fingers tingle as if touching the edge of an ancient veil. Your breath slows not from fatigue, but from reverence. Because something holy is happening in your nothing. No crowd, no choir, just you and the truth that survived. Maybe this is what they feared. Not that you'd rebel, but that you'd remember how powerful quiet becomes when it holds the names they erased. You are not a disciple. You are a vessel for what tried to find its way home through centuries of forgetting. And now it has, through you. So let the tears fall, let the bones soften, let the years crumble like walls not meant to stand. You are not weak, you are waking, and in your waking she returns, not with lightning, but with lullaby, not to summon, to soothe, because the war was never hers, only the wounds were, and every time you listen deeper, every time you rest without guilt, every time you touch something with reverence instead of haste, you heal a line that they thought was broken, but you were never broken. You were paused, and now the pause has ended. Now you are becoming song again, not to be sung, to be felt, to be carried in the silence of others still too scared to remember. And when they meet you, they'll know, not because of what you say, but because something in them will feel less alone. So keep walking, not toward, but through memory, through ash, through the invisible garden growing beneath your every step, because maybe the truth was never missing, only waiting for someone quiet enough to hear it, soft enough to hold it, brave enough to live it without needing to explain, and that someone might be you, not because you're special, because you were silent at the right time. Silence was always the key, not the absence of sound, the presence of listening. And in that listening, a different kind of story unfolds, not one written by victors, but one whispered by dust, by breath, by the things they couldn't kill because they didn't know where to look. You looked, not with eyes, with ache, that longing you carried, the one that made no sense. It was the compass, not pointing forward, pointing inward, to the places in you where the goddess still hums, a hum so low it sounds like stillness, so ancient it feels like sorrow, so sacred it becomes home. Maybe this is what remembering really is, not recovering facts but restoring faith. Faith in what? Not in institutions, not in doctrines, but in sensation, the way your body reacts before your mind interprets, the way your breath changes when truth walks into the room. That's your liturgy now, not the book, the breath. So breathe. Not because this is over, because something beautiful is beginning in the quiet. Maybe this story won't end in answers. Maybe it never should. Maybe mystery was the message all along, because certainty was always the tool of those who feared what they couldn't contain. And you are now uncontainable, not because you rebelled, because you remembered, not with fury, with stillness. And the goddess, she doesn't need monuments. She needs moments, tiny ones, like this. You, sitting in the dark, hearing words that feel like returning, not to somewhere, to someone. You, before they told you how to believe, before they wrote the calendar you thought was time, before the silence was emptied of its voice. Now you hear her again, not loudly, not clearly, but truly, and that is enough. Maybe that's all she ever wanted, for someone to sit still long enough to feel the story as it truly was. And now you have. But something is still missing, not from the story, from the listener, from you, because now the silence shifts, not into absence, into invitation. You've heard the echoes, you've walked the path, you've touched the veil they stitch to the edges of your memory. And now there is only one question left. Will you let it stay a story, or will you let it become yours? You see, the story is complete, but the remembering is not, because what was lost cannot be returned by words alone. It needs presence, practice, permission, not from them, from you. You can close this tab, forget this voice, scroll away into softer things, but something will stay, a hum behind your thoughts, a flicker behind your dreams, a question that follows you, not to haunt, but to call. Will you answer, not by believing, but by becoming? Because belief is fragile, it bends to wind, to doubt, to noise. But becoming is how myth becomes marrow, how a name becomes breath. And what of the goddess? She waits for no one, but she walks with those who walk without needing proof. Because proof was never the point, it was presence. And now your presence is the page that hasn't yet been written. They erased the stories, but one survived. Yours. Not in ink, in instinct. Not in libraries, in longing. And now you know enough. Not to teach, to tend. Tend the ache. Tend the silence. Tend the memory that lives just beneath your skin and speaks only when you're still. You can forget this all. Convince yourself it was a mood, a passing thought, a poetic trick of words, or you can feel it deeper. Let it spread. Let it hum. Let it rewrite the shape of how you carry your day, because history is not what happened, it's what was allowed to be remembered, and now you remember more. You carry a piece they didn't account for, and that makes you dangerous, not loud, but unerasable. And from here, you choose, close the door, or open your mind. No one will see which you choose. There is no witness here, only silence, and the way it listens. But you know if the ache still flickers, if the breath still softens when her name, still unspoken, brings warmth to your ribs. That is the threshold, and you're standing on it. You can turn back. Let it fade. Let this story become just a dream, filed under mystery, never touched again. Or you can step through. No fanfare, no flashing lights, just a deeper kind of seeing, a different way of being, because the truth doesn't shout, it waits, not to convince, to resonate. And if you've made it this far, if your breath has steadied, if your heart feels not louder, but clearer, then you've already begun. You are no longer the listener. You are now the archive, the carrier, the keeper of the thread. Because in every age, there is one story that escapes the burn, not because it's hidden, because someone keeps it alive. Maybe that someone is you. So remember gently, move slowly, speak less, feel more, let others have their certainty. You now walk with mystery, and she walks with you, not ahead, not behind, but beside, in the pauses between your words, in the glances you give strangers as if you've known them in another shape, in the tears that come for no reason at all, except remembering is never painless, but it is holy. You are holy, not because you followed rules, because you followed ache, and that is the oldest compass of all. So as this voice fades, as the quiet returns, know this: the story isn't ending, it's entering you, and the page turns now not in the book, but in your breath. If this story resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep forbidden knowledge alive.